The last saga of the epic the musical dropped, and it's finally time to dissect it for hints and references to the original. So welcome to the How Close Is It to the Original, the last part of the long series of videos about Epic the Musical. Disclaimer: this video isn't meant to be a critique of the actual quality of the musical by saying that accuracy is tantamount to good quality. It's important to understand that musicals and literature are different media that play by different rules. I'm just here to show you what the actual myth was like. But before we begin with the video, I want to shout out that if you ever need any kind of drink for your energy or if you're feeling a little down, my best bet here is to go to Gamer Subs. Get your delicious energy drinks here with the code ASTER for 10% off. Anyway, let's begin. Where we last left on in the Odyssey, poor Odysseus is still stuck onto his little raft, praying that Earthshaker Poseidon doesn't send him overboard and let the waves eat him alive. Odysseus wound up in the island of Scheria, the island of the Phaeacians. Now, important note here, if you watched my previous episodes about the comparison, I told you that the original Odyssey opened with Telemachus' perspective and his diplomatic search for his father, with his trip being referenced in the Wisdom Saga and soon in the Hold 'Em Down song. So going back to the timeline of Odysseus, the entire recount of the Odyssey from the very beginning is actually current time Odysseus telling the Phaeacians what the hell happened to him. So how did he get here? Well, when Odysseus wound up on the island, Athena appears in a dream to the princess of the island named Nausicaa. Athena disguised herself as Nausicaa's friend and convinced her to go to the shore to wash their clothes. The princess agreed, and there they go to the next day. This is where they find Odysseus, naked and a little afraid. Nausicaa takes care of him and brings him to the Queen Arete and godlike King Alcinous. It's actually here where he recounts the full story of the Odyssey and the other sagas of the epic the musical. Alcinous, the king, feeling bad for Odysseus, gives up his fully fledged ship with treasures and lets him leave the island. But just as Odysseus leaves, Poseidon gets mad that the Phaeacians helped Odysseus out and complain to Zeus, in which Zeus turns the ship into stone, and the Phaeacians realize that they probably should stop helping random strangers just in case they piss off the gods. So, the Ithaca Saga continues once again, and we end off after this journey. So here's another cool Athena and Odysseus moment once he gets to Ithaca. The musical doesn't really cover the reunion, which I kind of find a shame since Odysseus' return is where Athena is super hands-on in the plot. Athena in the myth shrouds Ithaca in a mist that conceals its true form, and when Odysseus woke up and realized that he doesn't recognize Ithaca, he thinks that the Phaeacians must have screwed him over. Athena, disguised as a shepherd, approaches him and says that he's actually in Ithaca. Odysseus conceals his true identity, to which Athena, as the god of strategy, is delighted by. She informs him that Telemachus has gone in search of news for him and warns him not to go to the palace or else he will get killed. And you know what I absolutely love about this moment? Athena is an absolute enabler because she's the one that helps Odysseus make a plan to kill all of the suitors. She disguises him as a beggar to fit in and hide from everyone. She also tells him to go to a swineherder named Eumaeus. This is where Athena calls Telemachus back from his trip and where the two are actually reunited. It's also Athena that warns him of the ambush sang in Hold 'Em Down. This is in contrast to the musical cutting immediately to Penelope's song about the challenge. Kind of wish Athena got more spotlight for her role in this saga, but I can understand why the musical decided to go for a more human-centric champion approach given the themes of the previous ones. Especially since we just witnessed that Odysseus was able to go toe-to-toe and pierce Poseidon through the heart. So, we begin with the first song, The Challenge. Thematically, it would be a nicer payoff that Odysseus' accomplishments were his own. The epic the musical focused on humanity's strengths in the midst of godhood, how man can persevere despite nature's wrath. But Greek mythology had the important consequence of being that, a mythology. It's not really culturally appropriate to discredit the omnipotence and almighty power of the gods, which is why humanity is oftentimes portrayed as either subservient or dependent on the gods for guidance and intervention. But the musical cuts straight to Penelope. The challenge for shooting a bow through 12 axes is pretty accurate to the original mythology, but where it gets muddled is in the next two songs. By this point of the original myth, Telemachus and Odysseus have reunited and they're hiding out in the castle. Being disguised as a beggar is ridiculed and laughed at by the suitors. Hold 'Em Down is an interesting song because it cements Antinous as an unforgivable piece of shit, which he is, but in the original myth, he's a little tamer. The bar really isn't that high though, all things considered. And can I just say that one of the reasons Antinous is such a dick in mythology isn't just because of his rude behavior, but also how he disrespected the guest friend hospitality usually prominent in Greek mythology. Greek mythology is notorious for upholding the customs that a host should always serve and respect their guests. And there are even entire myths out there where bad hosts are killed and punished. This concept is known as Xenia. We also see this in how, during the Odyssey, it is in good faith that the kings Odysseus meets give him favors. This is also the creed Odysseus invokes upon the Cyclops when he taunted him with his name, that the gods would punish him for eating and killing his guests. Conversely, guests are not supposed to abuse the host's generosity. Guests must not be burdens and are also expected to reciprocate their kindness in the future. The reason I'm bringing this up is if you didn't think he was a jackass before, now you know he's an ass. But another point about Antinous that I find really fascinating is that he somewhat admires Odysseus, saying that of all men here, no one is like Odysseus used to be. I saw him for myself, and I remember, though at the time, I was a little child. So while his disregard for Penelope's challenge is a great moment in the musical, it's a direct contrast to how he actually wanted to prove his worth by pushing through with the challenge, considering that Odysseus was in fact his king. I quote, "In his chest, his heart was hoping he would string the bow and with it shoot an arrow." Telemachus actually goads them to completing the challenge by telling the men that they should try the bow, and that he will happily step down once the challenge has a victor. You know what I actually found kind of funny during this scene is that Antinous was the one that's kind of facilitating the entire thing, and he was encouraging the other suitors during this scene like, "It's okay buddy, you tried, you can put the bow down." Then he gets shot. In the next song, Odysseus. In Book 22, we get the carnage that is everything. Odysseus takes a bow and goes on a rampage against all of the suitors. And when I say all, I mean all. What I want to focus on in this part is to compare the events of the carnage and the dialogue with the source material. Eurymachus is the one that tries to convince Odysseus to stand down because Antinous is dead, and that he should spare his people, as also depicted in the musical. But we know what happens there. The stranger part of this exchange is that in the musical, Eurymachus is just straight up shot, but in the original, Odysseus actually gives the suitors an ultimatum. They could run, but he will find them. Or they can fight like men. Eurymachus, realizing that their backs are against the wall, rallies the suitors and tells them to fight this man. Another core difference in this segment is the disposition of Telemachus as a character to all of the bloodshed. Telemachus in the epic asks the suitors to back down and that they will be spared. But in the original, Telemachus was ready to throw hands and was fighting alongside Odysseus as his second in command, which makes a lot of sense. Besides Odysseus and Penelope, it was Telemachus who has every right to be enraged by the presence of the suitors, considering he's been ridiculed by them for a good decade of his life. But after all of that bloodshed has been moved on, we get to the second to the last song of the epic the musical, I Can't Help But Wonder. I Can't Help But Wonder is the meeting song of Telemachus and Odysseus after they both engage in some good old classic murder. I don't know if the implication of the lyrics is that this is their first time seeing each other after all those years, or if they already saw each other before the carnage. Regardless, it's still a beautiful song that serves as their closing reunion after 20 years. But the difference of Epic the Musical's ending versus the glorious bloodshed ending of the myth is that this song paints Odysseus' journey as a man who had no choice but to go down a path of hatred and vindication. As I already mentioned before, in the original myth, Odysseus already saw and plotted with Telemachus and Athena before he got to the palace. So let's focus more on Athena. The ending of the Odyssey is actually with Athena seeing the carnage and going, "Oh shit, this may have gone on for too much." To the point that she even goes to ask Zeus and ask him if this bloodshed should go on. Remember, in this part of the mythology, Zeus is already tired of having to deal with not only Athena's entire plan with her crowd favorite Odysseus, but also Poseidon's insistent warning about the guy that blinded his son, Apollo snitching that his favorite cows were murdered, and all of the other shenanigans that Zeus had to deal with because of Odysseus. So Zeus, with his final bit of patience, just tells Athena that this whole thing was her idea, And wasn't that the point? That Odysseus was given the opportunity to fight and kill for his word. But Athena does go down and stop the carnage by making men of both sides surrender. Odysseus actually didn't listen to her and was ready to strike again had Zeus not intervened. Athena does tell him to stand down, and that is the end of this section. Will You Love Again is the final song of Epic the Musical, where we finally see the reunion between Odysseus and Penelope. What I really like about the musical is that I feel like it does what it has to do for the ending of the Odyssey, and I think straying from the source material in favor of a more heartfelt ending to the musical was the right choice. It's the perfect payoff, Odysseus finally seeing Penelope again and ending it with a high note. Unfortunately, the original myth doesn't have this big oomph. That's partially because Odysseus already meets Penelope before the carnage. In Book 19, while Odysseus was still disguised by Athena as a beggar, he was insulted by Melantho, one of the suitors. Penelope comes to defend Odysseus and even calls them a bold, brazen bitch. But then Penelope asks beggar Odysseus to follow her so that she may ask him a few questions. Penelope actually reveals how she got these suitors to wait for so long, even through Odysseus' absence, because it is strange that hundreds of men would be so patient for one woman in ancient Greece. It's because Penelope lied to them by saying that divine intervention has willed that she will only be married when she finished the fabric she was weaving on the loom. But soon, after years of no progress, and because she was ratted out by her slaves, the suitors saw that Penelope was actually unraveling the loom at night so she could never finish. The suitors forced her to complete the weave, and now she has no choice but to marry someone. This portion of her lie was referenced all the way back to the challenge, but I wanted to point it out here because she opened this conversation to Odysseus rather than just to herself. Beggar Odysseus then lies to her and says that his name is Atheon. Allegedly, Atheon saw Odysseus sailing from Crete. Penelope tests him multiple times about what he saw. First, what was this Odysseus wearing? For which beggar Odysseus says that he was wearing a woolen double purple cloak with a brooch of gold. Penelope admits that she was the one who put those clothes on him. She then renounces Odysseus' return and says that for now, he is not welcome in Ithaca. But Atheon tells her that Odysseus is coming back, still alive and with a lot of treasure. But this is the first conversation that they have before the carnage. So let's look at the last one, which has a lot of references to the song. Myth Penelope is written to be more suspicious of Odysseus, not necessarily because he's not who he says he is, but rather the hurt and grief of being left alone for decades. Penelope doesn't immediately forgive him, despite his return, and even more so making a huge mess in their home by killing the suitors and causing political problems for Ithaca. The core difference is that it's Telemachus that criticizes his mother for being a cruel and unfeeling woman, especially since he knows that this is the real Odysseus. He asks her why she was being so cold, and that she should be thrilled that his father is alive. Penelope rebukes this by saying she is amazed, but she has other ways of making sure that this is Odysseus. The test is referenced in the song as the wedding bed being moved away. And let me reiterate the purpose of myths from a cultural perspective. Not only was it a fun story that talked about the gods and the heroes of old, but it was also a cautionary tale on mortal vices and impulses, and the emphasis on the omnipotence, power, and grace of the gods being superior to any mortal affair. Myths are meant to showcase the gods as the final adjudicators of justice. And Odyssey, despite supposedly ending with Odysseus as the high note, actually ends with Athena's final speech. In the final book, Odysseus visits his father, and while the reunion is heartfelt, his father fears that the suitors' men and brothers would retaliate against them. The men of Ithaca create an army to rebel against the king, and Odysseus arms himself for a full-on national war. That is, until Athena and Zeus intervenes from the heavens and tells them to stop this pointless and ceaseless war. Overall, a great saga to end a great concept album, and I'm super excited to see what they have next. Epic the Musical is one of the best musicals in my opinion when it comes to adapting and adjusting what you have to do for the source material, especially for something as old as ancient Greece. I don't agree with the idea that faithfulness is always insurmountable to quality. Besides, I think that the creative liberties that they did, as well as the themes that they've presented in the story, are consistent, logical, and pretty cool, honestly. Having more of a focus on Odysseus as a person instead of the more political omnipotence of the gods is my cup of tea when it comes to theater. Anyway, my name is Aster and thank you for chilling with me. This has been the How Close Is It to the Original series, and I'm going to see you all next time. Bye-bye!